Hi Year 6, Mrs. Greene here, and I'll be taking over the writing this week. Before we move on to this week's learning objective, just want to say thank you so much to all the children who are working really hard from home and engaging with all the YouTube lessons and been following Wonder the text as well. Okay, so this week our learning objective, something that will really stand you in good stead for high school, is being able to use varied sentence structures, and we're going to do this within an autobiography. Okay, but before we do that, we're going to just rewind back to an objective that we covered previously. We're going to revise the use of apostrophes for contraction and possession. So what I've done is I've taken an extract from the wonderful text Wonder, but I've actually taken out the apostrophes for contraction and possession, as well as other punctuation. So what I'd like you to do now is pause the video and have a think about which punctuation could go where. What punctuation is missing? I've used an inverted comma at the beginning next to August to show that's spoken. August, you've been wanting to learn to play the drums, and then I've closed it with a closing inverted comma. Before that, I've used an apostrophe in between you've to show that is an apostrophe for contraction, because the word would have been you have. Then Mum said, because the sentence is carrying on, I've got a comma trying to get me back to look at her, full stop. But my eyes were covered by my bangs as I stared at a piece of old gum that was stuck to the bottom of Mr. Tushman's desk. So I've used an apostrophe for possession to show the desk belonged to Mr. Tushman. Moving on from that, again, I've got another inverted comma to show speech. Great! And if you think about the way that would have been said, it indicates there would have been strong feeling, so I've got an exclamation mark. Carrying on with okay, and there'll be a slight pause between okay and so, which is why I've used a comma. Why don't, another apostrophe to show contraction. You guys get going is a question, which is why I've got a question mark. And to end that dialogue, I've got another inverted comma. And then finally at the end, said Mr. Tushman, full stop. Okay, next, as part of our SPAG starter, we're going to check your understanding of the terms main clause and subordinate clause. If you've forgotten, don't worry, because we are going to be looking at that in a little bit. So again, I've taken some sentences from the class text Wonder, and while I read them out to you, I want you to focus on the parts of the sentences that are underlined, and I want you to think about, are they a main clause or are they a subordinate clause? Okay. While she was talking, I noticed Julian staring at me out of the corner of his eye. If I found a magic lamp and had one wish, I would wish that I had a normal face. Since I have never been to a real school before, I am totally petrified. Anyway, when Mum tells the story, she acts out all the parts. So what I want you to do is pause the video and have a think about, while she was talking, would that be a main clause or a subordinate clause? I would wish that I had a normal face, a main clause or a subordinate clause. Since I have never been to a real school before, main clause or subordinate clause. And finally, when Mum tells the story, main clause or subordinate clause. Okay, welcome back. Take a look at the answers. While she was talking is a subordinate clause. I would wish that I had a normal face is a main clause. Since I have never been to a real school before is a subordinate clause. And when Mum tells the story is a subordinate clause. Okay, the final SPAG test. I have written down some main clauses, again taken from Wonder, and I want you to have a go at adding a subordinate or a relative clause to them to add more detail. August has had 27 surgeries. I could tell Henry did not want to sit next to me. I suddenly realised I was going to like school. Think about how could these sentences be extended. So pause the video now and have a go. Right then, so as you can see, my three main clauses are written in blue, and I've extended my sentences using a relative clause or a subordinate clause, and they are written in red. August has had 27 surgeries as he was born with serious birth defects. Because he avoided the chair right in front of me, I could tell Henry did not want to sit next to me. I suddenly realised, which was a shock to even me, that I was going to like school. So well done if you were able to extend your sentences using relative clauses or subordinate clauses. Right, on to this week's learning objective. This week we are learning to use varied sentence structures when writing an autobiography. So if we break that learning objective down, first of all we're going to practice using varied sentence structures, using different sentence types, and then we're also going to be using them within an autobiography. Now, an autobiography is an account, some or all of a person's life written by them. These can give you more insight into their experiences and help you understand how they may have shaped that person. And the reason why we're choosing to do this is it allows you guys to consider your lives and where you want to be in the future, or what major achievements you might have already accomplished. The key vocabulary for this lesson, so this is the vocabulary that I hope by the end you will understand and be able to use: autobiography, relative, pronoun, compound, main, clause, complex, subordinate. If you go to any bookstore, you will find there's always examples of autobiographies written by very famous people: footballers, singers, actors, artists. And these are often a very interesting read because you just haven't just reached their goal by pure luck. But I'm going to read you part of the very famous Will Smith's autobiography. Some may say I've made it, but in my mind, I've always been an A-list Hollywood superstar. You all just didn't know that. I have many accomplishments, but all of this has been made possible by my ridiculous, sickening work ethic. Early life. I was born Willard Carroll Smith Jr. on September 25th, 1968 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Mother Caroline, who was a school board employee, and Father Willard C. Smith, who was a refrigeration company owner. Despite my family's Baptist faith, my middle-class upbringing saw me attend a strict Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic school. Later, I went on to attend Overbrook High School. Both schools taught me the value of discipline. Where I lived was a melting pot of cultures. For example, Orthodox Jews coexisted with a large Muslim population. This too impacted me greatly in a positive way. I was a good student, but not innocent. Nevertheless, I know my quick tongue helped me get out of trouble. Even as a child, I knew that having a sense of humour was the way forward. Because of this, I soon gained the nickname Prince. When I was 12, I began rapping, emulating heroes like Grandmaster Flash and tinging rhymes with a comedic element. At 16, I met Jeff Towns, who would later go on to become my future collaborator and dear friend. Since a small child, I enjoyed entertaining, and working with Jeff on something I had a passion for was easy. It is here where our duo, DJ Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince, was born. But what features would you expect to see in an autobiography? Well, because Will Smith is writing his own autobiography, you would expect it to be written in the first person. So you can see the use of I and me and our. You'd also expect an opening statement. This is a way to hook the reader in, and they often start with a quote, with quite a poignant quote. I particularly like, I have many accomplishments, but all of this has been made possible by my ridiculous, sickening work ethic. Moving on, autobiography will be written in the past tense because it's writing about the past. And if you look carefully, you'll be able to see that Will Smith has chosen to use many past tense verbs, such as was, went, taught. You can clearly see it's written in chronological order because it starts at the very beginning. It starts when Will Smith is born. Adverbials of time are used to help link all of Will Smith's ideas, but also show the chronological order too, particularly by using ages and dates. Key life events are also included. So if you look in Will Smith's case, he's spoken about his parents, the schools he went to, meeting his partner, his collaborator, and what age that was. And he's also ensured that he's included his thoughts and feelings throughout, which really helps the reader understand where he was coming from. And finally, there's one more feature that you might have noticed but that I haven't listed. So, it's the subheading Early Life. Many autobiographies will contain subheadings throughout the piece. This will help the reader navigate, so locate where to go. So for instance, the reader might not want to read about the beginning or the early life of somebody, they might want to read about the later life, or they might want to read about the education, or they might want to read about any awards. So by having subheadings, helps structure an autobiography. Right, having a look at the same waggle, you've noticed that I've highlighted some different sentences, and we're going to start to have a look at the different sentence types now. So in the green you can see I've highlighted a relative clause. In the purple I've highlighted a main clause. In the blue I've highlighted a compound sentence, and in the yellow I've highlighted a complex sentence. Now, having a piece of writing with the same sentence types throughout can make it very monotonous or very boring for a person to read. Varying sentence types can therefore reduce repetition, limit boredom, but can also add emphasis and detail to your writing. And we're going to have a look now at more detail at each sentence type. Okay, to start learning about sentence types, you have to firstly understand what a simple sentence is. So what makes a sentence a sentence? Now, lower down the school, they may have been referred to as simple sentences, but in Year 6 we call them main clauses. Now, a main clause is a sentence that makes perfect sense on its own. It is independent, it doesn't need anything else to support it. Now, to determine what a simple sentence or a main clause is, you need to look very carefully at the sentence and identify what is the subject and what is the verb. So looking at my sentence, I went to my first school in 1992. I, the noun, is clearly the subject of the sentence, and the subject is doing the verb went. Okay, moving on to the second type of sentence, a compound sentence, is when you join two simple sentences, two main clauses together. Now, you might have noticed that there are some conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet so, which we like to refer to as fanboys to help us remember. Now, to join two main clauses together, you can use one of the fanboys. So let's have a go and see. So what I've done is taken my first main clause, I went to my first school in 1992, and I have joined it onto another main clause, I was ready, using a coordinating conjunction, or a fanboys, for. By joining two main clauses together using a coordinating conjunction forms a compound sentence. A complex sentence might sound like it's complex and a bit tricky, but it's not. So, again, we need to have a main clause in a complex sentence. So a main clause is a simple sentence that makes perfect sense on its own, but we need to join it onto what is now called a subordinate clause using a subordinate conjunction. So let's have a go. So I've chosen to use a subordinate conjunction because. So the because starts my subordinate clause, because I was ready. A subordinate clause can be identified using two helpful tips. One, look for a subordinate conjunction. There are some listed above. And two, listen to the sentence carefully. Does it make sense on its own? Can it stand independently, or does it need more information? Because I was ready. It definitely needs more information. So because I was ready is the subordinate clause, which is then linked to the main clause. I went to my first school in 1992. Now, because we have opened the sentence with a subordinate conjunction, we need to use a comma to separate the two clauses, to separate the subordinate clause from the main clause. What I'd like you to have a go at doing, pause the video and have a go at choosing a subordinate conjunction from the list and adding a subordinate clause on to my main clause. I went to my first school in 1992, and I'm also going to have another go myself using a different subordinate conjunction. Okay, welcome back. So I've had another go. This time I've chosen to use subordinate conjunction even though. So even though I was only 3, comma, again there's my subordinate clause, my sentence that doesn't make sense on its own, and I've still joined it onto my main clause. I went to my first school in 1992. Something that also gets very confusing with writing is that relative clauses can also make up complex sentences. Now, we talked before about using subordinate conjunctions to write subordinate clauses that form a complex sentence when joined to a main clause. However, if you are writing a relative clause, which lots of us do, we've been practicing relative clauses since year 5, you are also writing a subordinate clause. Now, to write a relative clause, you need to open with a relative pronoun, and I've listed them above: who, whom, which, that, where, when, why, and what. So I'm going to again add a subordinate clause to my main clause. I went to my first school in 1992, but I'm going to use a relative pronoun. So let's see what I'm going to do. So here we go. I went to my first school in 1992 was my original main clause, but to extend the sentence to add extra detail, I have dropped into the middle a relative clause. Now the relative clause also makes up a subordinate clause, which altogether forms a complex sentence. I've used which as a relative pronoun to do this, but I'm just going to have a go at using one more as well. Okay, so here's my complex sentence using a relative clause as a subordinate clause, using the relative pronoun where. I went to my first school, comma, where I met my lifelong friend in 1992. So again, the underlined part forms the main clause, and the part in the middle is your relative clause, your subordinate clause. Okay, so now we're going to start planning our actual piece of writing, our autobiography. With any writing, it's always really sensible to jot down your ideas first, because any great writer doesn't write something straight away. It might take days and weeks and months of planning, of writing notes, of editing, of redrafting. So it's really important that we do this step. So I'm just going to jot down some of my ideas, which are going to help me write about my life up until now. So I'm going to write down some of my friends, some of my really, really special friends in my life. So I'm going to write down Sophie, and I'm going to write down Gemma. One of my favourite memories is visiting Turkey and getting married. And having a baby boy. Future ambition. I would like to be, let's just say, I would like to be a singer. Just like Beyonce. Okay. I went to, what schools did I go to? So I went to St Anne's in Bewdley. I went to Worcester Tech College, and then I went to university in London. Okay, hobbies. So I love going to classes at the gym. I love spin, and I also like running. And that's just reminded me actually that I would like to do a half marathon. Okay, pets. I remember having a pet when I was younger. Cookie. Cocker spaniel, and my family, so mum, dad, brother and sister. So take this time to jot down some of your ideas as well. Right, after you've jotted down your initial thoughts and some of the key things that have happened in your life, it's then worth moving on to thinking about how you're going to structure your paragraphs. Now, it might be that you write down some subheadings now, or if you want, you can use my first few as a starter. So I've decided for my first paragraph, I'm going to talk about my family and my birth. So I've jotted down some notes. So I've written, born 16th of Feb in High Wycombe, my mum was a nurse, my dad's a pilot, I moved around and my brother was also born. Moving on to my next paragraph, under 5, I lived in a quaint village, I was very close to my brother, went to nursery, had a working mum. And my next paragraph will talk about my primary school, and this is where I settled in Bewdley. I went to St Anne's Primary School and where my sister was born. Now these are just my initial notes, but these notes will help you with forming your sentences because you will be able to extend them and add more detail to fully explain. Okay, I'm going to have a go at modelling now using all the notes that I recorded a minute ago. So if you remember, autobiographies start with an opening statement which can be a quote. So I'm going to go with, life is a mix of ups and downs, but way more ups to start as my quote, quite a positive quote. Okay, then I'm going to write a subheading and I'm going to go with early life. Okay, I'm going to underline that. Now, if you remember on my notes, we started with my birthday and where I was born. So, on the 16th of February, 1983, I was born in High Wycombe, Buckinghamshire. To a mother, in fact I'm going to get rid of A, to mother Tanya White, and I'm going to extend this now using a relative clause, who was a nurse, and father Dexter White, who was in the forces. Okay, now I'm just going to highlight where I've got my relative clauses. So who was a nurse, and who was in the forces. I'm now going to explain a little bit about that, opening with a subordinate conjunction to write a complex sentence. Because of that fact, comma to separate the clauses, my family frequently moved around. I'm going to extend it again, which made it difficult to form lasting friendships as a young child. So I've also included my thoughts and feelings as a young child. Okay. Nevertheless, we were an extremely, I'm going to put a squiggly line because I'm not sure how to spell that, extremely, I have to check that later. We were an extremely loving family. Okay, so my journey began in Kent. Right, I want to extend this sentence now. I want to write a compound sentence. So my journey began in Kent, but there's my coordinating conjunction, my fanboy but then we moved to London, followed by Cheshire, Worcester, and finally settled in Hughley. Meanwhile, there's my adverbial of time. Meanwhile, in 1984, my brother Richard was born. Okay, so there's my first paragraph. I'm just going to have a look now at the features. So, I've got dates. I'm clearly writing in the first person. I'm writing in the past tense. I've included lots of my thoughts and feelings. You can clearly see I've got my relative clauses in green. I've got some subordinate clauses because of that fact in red. And I'm looking to see if I've got my compound sentence, which is two sentences joined together with a coordinating conjunction. Yes, I have there. Okay, now's your turn. So what I'd like you to do is have a go at writing your own autobiography up until now. So jot down all your notes about what you've done so far, about your family and your friends and your pets and your hobbies, and then have a go at writing an autobiography with a focus on using a range of different sentence structures. Okay, so for one chili, using coordinating conjunctions, or remember we called them fanboys as a way to help us remember. Use coordinating conjunctions to write compound sentences, so when two main clauses are joined together. Okay? Chili 2, use relative pronouns to begin subordinate relative clauses, so words like which, who, that, to write relative clauses. And finally, use subordinating conjunctions to begin complex sentences, as words like because, even though, although, if. Okay, so that is the end of our English lesson. I really hope that you are more confident now writing a range of different sentence types, and those words at the beginning that we weren't sure about, main clauses and compound sentences and complex sentences, you're more confident with and understand more. I would love it if you guys would have a go at writing an autobiography and send all your work in to the Year 6 email, so year6@frenchprimary.books.uk. We always love reading your work.